Hi, welcome to the Philosophy, Science, and Religion podcast. This is George Ortega. I'm here with Chandler Klebs, Trick Slattery, and Poffo. Poffo, what's your last name? Oh, Ortiz, sorry. All right, so
Ortiz.
yeah, thanks. So, all right, so what we're going to explore today is the question, who decides what the definition of God is? I mean, we could apply this to other topics also. Who decides what the definition of anything is? But let's focus on this, to focus because we've talked before about whether we can conclude that God exists or not. And naturally that depends on how we're defining God. And naturally that depends on, what the criteria is for, the proper definition of not just that word, but any word.
The very first thing that needs to be established, yes, is what the definition of God is. And if you guys know anything about the semantics of it or the etymology, it comes from the German word Gott, which was the Germanic deity, basically. It was their name for God, and because English is so heavily reliant on German, that's where the word God actually came from. But you have this same synonymous concept in almost all cultures of a supreme being, of a creative power, of the originating source of all life, of all things, and essentially many different names all down through history, many different gods down through history that various personified aspects of nature, personified with human qualities.
Right, I hear you. And actually, I want to focus on that, Poffo. In other words, our modern conception of God evolved from previous conceptions of quote-unquote gods, more than one God. Basically polytheism preceded monotheism. So basically, I think let's see if we can reach agreement in terms of why the concept emerged. And I think what happened however many thousands of years ago, 10, 20, 30,000, who knows how long ago, people just, began to ask, why does it rain? Why does it thunder? Sure. Why are there hurricanes and tornadoes and stuff?
Sure. We're living.
Hold on. Let me finish, Poffo.
Oh, sorry. So, we need to get you on camera so I can see you when you're still talking.
No, that's all right. Well, just wait until I'm done. All right. So basically, what happened was that, they're asking the question why things happen, right? And so initially, they basically, just as we use terms like, heat and convection and air pressure to explain how, let's say, hurricanes and tornadoes happen, right? Their vocabulary, used the words of gods of the god of wind, and the god of, let's say, of anger combined, to create a hurricane or something. In other words, they personified this stuff, whereas we in science tend not to. But that's, that was I think the original purpose for coming up with gods. Wait, hold on, one more. And so the idea is that from that purpose, then I think they ultimately concluded that, all right, that if there are all these multitudinous different kinds of gods or forces, that it seems logical to conclude that there's one, central governing force. Okay, go ahead, Poffo.
Okay, all I want to say was that much of that is true. Much of what you said is true. It's a little bit of an oversimplification with the formation of monotheism, but it's basically accurate. And all I wanted to make the distinction was say that it wasn't just semantics. They weren't just describing forces of nature. They literally thought that there was a personal being behind all of these powers. And as you said, they personified it. So we anthropomorphize, aspects of nature, qualities of nature, and we project our own, human traits, human characteristics onto these naturally occurring events and phenomena. It's a long, sort of very sordid, convoluted, complex history as how we went from animism to polytheism to monotheism and that whole that whole like sort of trajectory. It's very complex, but I think we want to get to the philosophy of it, the idea, really.
We just want to reach a general agreement on this. Trick, what's your take? Did I describe it?
Well, yeah. I think you did a good job, George. There's two key words that I think apply to the majority of gods throughout history, and that's being, which we should get into this word being, and deity, I think, because a lot of people would consider their god a deity. So those two words, I think, are important concepts for the word God. And so when we talk about a god that isn't a deity or isn't a being, then I think it becomes problematic semantically.
All right, so we'll get into that later when we go into the attributes of God and how they can be, how they should be derived. Chandler, what's your take there? Do you generally agree, or?
Well, I agree with your original assessment, about how monotheism sort of grew out of polytheism, and even if it is an oversimplification, like Poffo was saying, the main point is we have to keep it simple for the sake of discussion, obviously. But I'm interested in this from a perspective of, what did people believe? Why did they believe it? And how did they use their deities to explain nature? So I'm interested in it from that point of view, but I do not believe that there is a correct definition of God, because that's acting like who has the correct definition of unicorns, And
All right, well, Chandler, I want to address that directly, immediately. So, why do you not believe that there's no direct? I mean, for example, what comes to mind is the people who believe in free will can say, well, you want to know something? There is no correct definition of free will, because they in other words, they can use that, and then we can say, well, free will is the ability to choose independent of factors outside of our conscious control. And they say, no, that's just, your definition. There is no correct definition. So how would you address that argument to this, this matter of there being a correct definition to either God or pretty much anything?
Well, I agree there, George. This is a problem, because when we talk about free will or morality, people can do that. They can just say, oh, well, you have the wrong definition. Here's the right definition. Or they can say, oh, well, there is no right definition, so you can't tell me I'm wrong in anything. And I find this to be a serious problem, and I want to know how we're supposed to address it, because I haven't found a solution.
Can I make a suggestion? Just hear me out for a minute.
Sure.
I am less concerned with people's definitions and opinions of what God is or who God is, and I'm much more concerned with what actually exists. So I would like, if you allow me to, maybe somebody else take a turn, but if you come back to me, I would like to actually describe what actually exists in reality, and then I can sort of articulate how that represents that can represent what is traditionally thought of as the deity or the creative force or creative power, because everybody's got their own opinion. Everybody's going to have their own take on it. You got an atheist, a pantheist, an agnostic here, and, and a deist. So
I think I can do it a bit more concisely. In other words, basically we went from polytheism to monotheism, and so now we're basically at the point at which, in order to test, to whether we can come up with a definition that's accurate, we have to now define God. So I think let's start and let's reach agreement on these attributes before we go to the next ones.
I'd like to say something before we go on, because you talked about the whole free will semantic thing, and I also have a problem with compatibilism, because it takes a revisionist. Tries to revise the word free will in a way that's compatible. And if we look at that word and we look at their definition, the compatibilist definition, that ability exists. But the problem with the revisionist definition is that so many people believe that they have the abilities of the traditional definition. So it becomes a problem, and I think this is going to be this. It falls into the same problem when we talk about the word God.
I agree with you, but
okay.
But in other words, the free will that Darwin and Freud and Einstein refuted, the free will that that Augustine meant when he coined the term. I mean, like, there's it's been a debate, and yes, they can revise it. It's kind of like a straw man argument, but that doesn't mean they're right. There's still a proper definition for free will.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So this is what I'm saying. So I'm saying the problem with just defining a word in any way you want is when you start revising words, it becomes confusing, it becomes problematic, and it causes all these other issues along the way.
In terms of communication with others.
Correct.
Right. Correct. For yourself, you might have complete, peace, and peace about the idea. But for when you're speaking with others, because they already have their preconceived notions. And very, very quickly, I feel like George has a lot he wants to say. So let me just get this out, and then you can run with it, George. You have the floor. All I want to say is, from my perspective, I am actually in the process of redefining what God is, redefining the classical, conventional definition of God, and expanding our definition of nature. And that's all I want to say, is that from my perspective, my point of view, I'm actually trying to redefine what people consider to be God and expand people's understanding of what nature is.
All right, so Poffo, as we go through the process, then just if we're missing something, or just if we're deviating from what you mean, then definitely bring that into it. All right, so
yeah, but go for it. Go
and trick, we're on the same page. In other words, like, for example, we can define a chair as something you sit on, right? But once people start defining a chair as something you sail across the ocean in, no. A chair is something you sit on.
Well, actually, as long as you sit on whatever you're riding across the ocean in, then it's a chair and a boat or whatever.
That's a good point. Words change. They evolve.
Definition, or a better example. Like a chair is not something that you bake cakes in. Okay?
Yeah, I wouldn't try that.
All right. So we're on the same page in this. So let's start with the attributes of God. I believe that the fundamental, one primary attribute is that God is everything.
That's not actually the conventional understanding of God, but omnipresence is involved. But that's an alternative, actually, understanding of what God is, because you're speaking of the pantheistic notion, but in traditional conventional religion, it's the creative the creative power, the all powerful, that's omnipotent, creative aspect. That's usually the first.
And Poffo, and here's where Trick. Before I respond to that, what's your take?
Well, I mean, if we talk about Zeus, for example. When people use the word Zeus as a god, they didn't refer to Zeus being everything, comprising.
No, Trick. No, we've moved completely away from polytheism. Now, when we refer to God, we're referring to the monotheistic God.
Right. That's not the monotheistic understanding of God. The monotheistic understanding is a creative person. Yeah.
I hear you. Hold on, Trick. So, considering that we're moving from polytheism to monotheism, how does that, describing God then as everything? What's your take on that?
I don't think monotheism necessarily follows to that either. For example, some people are deists, and deists don't believe that God are everything. They think God existed, he created the universe, and then pretty much let the universe just go off separate. So a deist would say that a deist would be a mono. Like there's no multiple gods. There's only one God for a deist. Yet it's not. It doesn't encompass everything. So it doesn't necessarily imply the word God itself doesn't necessarily imply everything.
Chandler,
it doesn't. It doesn't at all. It doesn't at all. It implies omni powers, like omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent.
Let's not get into that yet. Let's go one at a time. Chandler, what's your take?
Okay, so far my take is that, to a lot of people, they want a God that's everything to them. They want a God that represents everything that's important to them, everything that they consider sacred or important or whatever, and then they have this source of all those things, and they call that God. And so for a lot of people, it's fundamental that they believe that their God is omnibenevolent. And that's why there's so much of this problem of evil
now,
stuff.
forget it. Just focus on the everything.
Well,
George, when you say everything, you mean in terms of physical matter, in terms of all the energy matter in the universe. That is not the traditional understanding of what God is.
Well, again, we'll address that. Let me, I just want to hear Chandler's take, and I'll address what you guys are saying.
Yeah, what I would say, and this is from my experience, is that people try to say that God is the source of all the matter, that God created all matter, but that God existed pre the universe, pre-matter, if that makes sense.
Excellent, Chandler. So that's where we're going to take off. So in other words, what Trick and Poffo are saying, that not everybody believes that God is everything, but if we consider this common understanding that God created the universe, the reality, here's where logic comes in. In other words, so fine, not everybody may agree on God being everything. Some people believe that God transcends reality. You hear that sometimes.
But most people do. Yeah.
Here's where logic. Well, no, not most. Here's where logic comes in, because transcendence has no part. There's none of that in the Bible. So we're at a
I disagree, but okay.
Hold on, Poffo. So we are at a place where you've got two different definitions, and just like with free will, and just like whether a chair can be an oven or whatever, now we've got to apply logic to this. Now, here's the logic that derives from what Chandler said in terms of God creating reality. So if God created the universe, the world, reality, whatever we want to call it, then I think the first conclusion we have to draw is that God is the only thing that existed before his creation, before, he created the world. Let's talk about it in terms of the world, the universe, the world. So then where the logic applies to this is that if God must have existed before the world, the only thing from which God could have created the world is God. That's all that existed before the world.
That the universe came forth from the potentiality that existed within that God. Yeah, sure.
Well, yeah. But whether we forget about potentiality, it's like God was the only thing that existed before his creation of the world. So it's impossible that God would have created the world from anything but God.
Sure, but there's also such a thing as oh crap! I forget. There's a term that means to create something out of nothing. It's like the fifth attribute of God.
Ex nihilo, but
yeah, ex nihilo, yeah.
Yeah, no, not the Latin phrase. There's actually a term for the ability for something to spontaneously create itself or existing, as its own for its own sake.
But anyway, I think what you're referring to. Sure, go ahead.
Just to clarify, you're saying that when you say God created the world or God created the universe, how are you using the word world, for example? Like some people believe that God created the heaven, and then created the earth, or there were angels that existed, that God created angels and then created humans, or something like that. So it's possible to say that the God created things prior to his creation of the universe.
Absolutely, but then even if you say that, right, then I think and this is where another attribute of God comes in. I think that I think there's universal agreement on is that God is eternal. God always existed. So whether we're addressing this current universe world that we're that we have now, or addressing previous creations, worlds, God logically must have preceded them in order to have created them.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that did you want to go down the list, or did you want to do this sort of systematically, George?
Did I want to get on what list? What do you mean?
The list of the attributes traditionally.
Well, I'm doing that. I'm doing
given
that
to God.
So, all right. So
Okay.
so basically, all right. So logically, again, I think we're agreeing and concluding that that if God existed before the creation, if God is the only thing that existed before what God created, then God must be the creation. So if we define, reality, the world, as everything there is,
Okay.
then God has to be everything
That's
there
what
is.
I was asking. Yeah. So that's what I was asking. If you're saying the world is everything that exists, and God created the world, then obviously God created everything at that point. So, yes.
Excellent. All right, Chandler, what's your take?
Yeah, I think I would be in general agreement with that, because this concept that the only material from which to create all of the universe would be God, since God would be all that was existed according to the way we're talking about it. So yeah, that makes perfect sense, really. And I think there's a name for that. I think it might be panentheism or something like that. I'm not entirely sure.
Panentheism is pantheism, but the idea that God also exists outside of its own creation. That creation, the universe, is a part of God, but there is more to God, and I believe they also would posit that God has a level of consciousness, that God is aware on some level, which to me is just another form of theism.
Yeah, so let's not get into that. So, Poffo, what's your? Go ahead, Trick.
I just want to clarify one more thing. If we're saying God created everything, we're really saying God created everything that isn't God. So we're saying that God didn't self-create himself, obviously.
Right, and Trick, that's a question beyond, I think, our ability to answer. Right, I mean, this idea.
If we're postulating an eternal God, then we're saying obviously there was no creation of the God.
I would like to add something, if you don't mind. Well, since we are supposedly created from God, since God is all that existed to create anything from, then we are all still God. So there's no such thing as God creating something that's not God. It's only shifting.
Very good. Very good, Chandler. Yeah, we are God. It's like, every particle molecule of the Atlantic Ocean is Atlantic Ocean. We're not in the entirety of God, but we are God, just like every particle of the Atlantic Ocean is Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah.
George, I just want to say I'm not in disagreement with you at all. I mean, you know what I believe. You should know by now what I believe. So I'm not contesting anything you're saying. I'm just trying to follow the thought exercise. Okay.
Excellent. So, Professor, so I think we're saying all four of us are in agreement that the proper attribute, one attribute of God that seems logical, that seems correct, is that God is everything. Okay. Now, the next
God created everything. I don't know if I buy into the God is everything.
Well, that's what we're considering, Trick. Let's continue with it then.
Can I say something? Because I really, there's a lot I want to get out, but I don't want to,
Go ahead, but just take it. Just deal with the everything component.
I'm trying, but I'm not okay. I see what you're trying to construct here, George, in terms of logic, but that's not the way most people have understood God, and that's not what the Bible teaches.
We don't care about, in other words, most people, but before this century. Not just people, most astronomers believed that all the stars were fixed in their position and they were there eternally, okay? Then, we understood that the universe arose from a big bang and it's expanding. So it doesn't matter what most people, believe.
But what I'm saying is they're not going to follow that logic because it's been ingrained in their minds that God is transcendent.
We're not concerned with that.
That God is separate.
Well, I would have to disagree slightly because I do care what the majority of people think because affects.
Chandler, I'm not saying you don't care. I'm saying for the purpose of this, exploration.
Yeah, George is trying
that's tangential.
Yeah, okay, I get what you're saying, George. Just for the sake of this discussion, we're trying to leave out other people's emotional biases there.
Right. Okay. So now in terms of Trick. All right. Wait a minute. So let's get back to the logic. If God is let's say God is the only thing that's eternal. Can we agree on that?
For their theory's sake, we can agree on it. Sure.
Right. So if God is the only thing that's eternal, then...
I don't think you need an eternal God. right? I mean, it's not
Well,
a.
I mean, 'cause like, like if you don't have an eternal God, then you'd have to have an eternal reality, which would lead to then like reality creating God. But that creates a problem because God is supposed to be creator of reality.
Go ahead and go run through your exercise, George.
All right.
Like,
so
keep going.
So it seems we're concluding that if God is eternal,
we're not concluding, but we're following along.
No, we're concluding. We are concluding. We're agreeing so far that if we understand God as being eternal, then God must also be everything, because God must have preceded anything else that God would have created.
Sure. I mean, as in terms of in terms of a pre-existent antecedent source, yes.
In the sense of a monotheistic God that is the creator of everything, yes. But
excellent.
Okay. In that sense, because
yes.
like I said, we can go into a whole different other senses of the word God that do not apply that specific.
Right, but again, you guys got to keep in mind that we're trying to come up with an accurate conception of God. It doesn't matter to us what other people believe in a God, for example, that transcends, and we'll deal with that and stuff. Some of these things they come up with, they're just clearly wrong. So we're not concerned with all the possible definitions of God.
Why wouldn't a polytheistic God? Why wouldn't multiple gods be an accurate description?
Well, that actually goes to why monotheism was an evolution from polytheism. Basically, what happens in terms of logic, if you have these kind of these gods, governing reality, logic tells you that there has to be a force or an entity or a being that's governing them. It's the idea that everything is one. There's one reality.
Why couldn't there be multiple gods that are eternal?
Because there is, for example, one, and here we get into kind of like the physics of this, because there are only one set of laws of nature. If there were multiple gods who are eternal, and let's say we also wanted to grant them omnipotence, that would create a confusion. They would have different systems of reality. There's gravity in one, there isn't in another.
So why do we need to grant them omnipotence, and why do we need to have?
I don't think we're gonna get through this episode.
No, that's all right. That's all right. It's good for the exploration of it. All right. So if we don't grant them omnipotence, then the problem becomes that if they're not let's say we say Zeus is the god of lightning and Neptune is the god of the oceans or water, whatever. So you describe, some kind of a domain or a power to each of these gods. But then that again, this is like the essence of monotheism, the essence of Judaism, to realize that if there are all these gods with specific but not complete powers, there has to be a unified system within which they work. In other words, for example, God, the god of Zeus is the god of lightning, for example, can't control water because that's Neptune's domain, right? And Neptune can't control lightning because that's Zeus's domain. But then there's got to be a governing force that set that rule, set that law, that they each have their individual domains.
There were titans that existed before them, and the Olympians came after, and so the rule of the Earth, the cosmos, was split up between the three brothers, Hades and Neptune.
Well, we don't have to get into the details of this. It's just like that.
I'm not sure what you want to get into that. Okay, real quick, I just want to say
hold on.
The shift.
Let Trick address this. Hold on, Poffo.
Okay. So you're saying logically this is the case. Why is logically this the case that there needs to be this governing force that splits out the three?
If we have polytheists, if we have multiple gods. So again, one is the god of lightning, right? Well, what is preventing that god from also controlling wind and water.
Let's just say that these gods aren't omnipotent.
Exactly, but the reason they're not omnipotent, in other words, like if they are not omnipotent, there has to be a reason why. In other words, there has to be a reason for the constraint, and that constraint, in other words, something is preventing them from being omnipotent.
They were just eternally not omnipotent.
Well,
okay. Their eternal state.
Okay.
The move to monotheism had much more to do with politics than any logic. They weren't thinking logically back.
No, there was logic to this. Chandler?
Okay.
No, I'm not saying that, George, hold on a second. George, I'm not saying what you're saying is not logical. I'm saying that the shift and the move historically to monotheism had much more to do with the politics of the geographic of the areas involved and whose God was better than whose God.
I don't know if I buy that.
But that's history. I mean, that's exactly how it formed. Zoroastrianism sealed it, and they influenced the Jews.
George is just trying to see if we could create a definition of God that is a logical definition of God.
I know
and
what
I'm
he's trying to do because I've done this before, and I would like to let him finish.
Wait a minute. So let's just cut to this. Wait a minute. If you guys are saying if where we're stuck is that you can't come up with a proper logical definition of God.
We're not stuck. We're not stuck, but it's gonna be difficult to convey this to masses.
Papa, come on! If you cut me mid-sentence, if you guys are asserting that we can't come up with a logical definition of God, how can you possibly come up with a logical refutation of God?
Because you can know that the majority of people who believe in God believe in some sort of conscious deities. They believe in some sort of conscious creator, and if there is no conscious creator, if there's no evidence for a conscious creator, then we shouldn't believe in a conscious creator. Regardless of his.
If you're talking evidence, you're talking logic. You're not talking democracy or popularity of a view.
George, I'd like to let you finish what you're doing, and then I would like to take a stab at it myself. But I don't want to talk. I just want to let you get through it. So, but
all right,
go ahead.
All right, so, but no, we actually just leapfrogged, way far into this. So, Trick, I mean, you can't have it both ways. Either we define God logically according to what makes the most sense, or we say that you can't refute God logically either, because if you're saying, well, God doesn't exist because there's no evidence, that's a logical statement.
I didn't say God doesn't exist because there's no evidence. I'm saying if there's no evidence for a deity or a being that created the universe, we shouldn't believe in a deity or being that created the universe. Not that there isn't one. We don't know if there's a lack of knowledge. We shouldn't use an argument from ignorance fallacy to go in either direction. We should just say we don't believe in it.
All right, but Trick, but then what you're doing by that is then you're negating the existence of the physical universe, because according to our best science, the first event about which we have any knowledge is the Big Bang, but we have no idea what mechanism created that. We have no evidence of that.
We have no idea what mechanism. Well, we have no idea what mechanism created that, which means we shouldn't believe in a specific mechanism that created it.
No, wait a minute. If you're saying that we shouldn't believe in a God that created, reality, because we have no evidence of this, God. Aren't you also saying that we shouldn't believe in the universe because we have no? I mean, no. What I'm going more toward, Trick, because I
we have evidence for the universe.
Well, actually, we have evidence for the universe, but I think what I'm going toward now is actually in past discussions we've addressed whether there has to be a mechanism for something. In other words, we in terms of consciousness, there's a mechanism that's biological in terms of the brain, and that explains consciousness. But I think I think you may have said, or as some of us may have said in the past, that if we can't find a mechanism for something, we can't logically conclude that it exists.
No, so that's not true. Just because we can't find a mechanism for something doesn't mean we can't logically conclude it exists.
All right, good. Okay. All right. So
I'm just gonna chime in. I'm gonna chime in real quick. Let you guys talk and just give me some time at the end. That's all I ask.
All right.
Give me some time at the end to make my case.
So Trick, I hear you.
Before we run out of time.
You're saying we have evidence of a creation, but we don't have evidence of a creator.
We have evidence of the universe existing. We have evidence of a potential Big Bang. We're not really 100% sure of what caused the Big Bang, or if there was some eternal Big Bang or anything like that, or if there was a multiverse situation that's eternal, like just eternally
right. And Trick, I get it. I get what you're saying. So like basically, again, just to paraphrase what you're saying like we can like know the things that exist from evidence, but in terms of like, let's say, the universe, the physical universe with the Big Bang, since we don't have evidence of what created the Big Bang, we can't conclude that there was anything before the Big Bang.
No, we can't. It's not that we can't conclude that there was anything before the Big Bang. We can't conclude what existed before the Big Bang.
All right, but can we conclude that something existed before the Big Bang?
If we're going to assume that there's no acausal events that happen, so if we're going to assume if we're going to make that assumption, then yes, we can say that something caused the Big Bang, or the Big Bang, the energy in the Big Bang is an eternal energy, and it just came into being. It came into expansion at one point.
And I think we're saying the same thing. We're saying the same thing. Whether it's an expansion, whether the energy always existed, or there was something that created it. Something preceded the Big Bang.
Sure.
Now, so again, let's go back to this attribute of eternality. I mean, like, would you describe what preceded the Big Bang as having always existed, in whatever form? Again, it could have changed its forms an infinite number of times, but must this whatever existed before the Big Bang have always existed?
We have two options. Either something always existed, meaning we have an infinite regress, or we have a non-caused event, an acausal event that somewhere along the line, just a non-causal event happened, and then everything else followed after that.
All right, but
those are our two options.
But to cut to the chase, I mean, are we in agreement that there is no such thing as an uncausal event, except conceivably the very beginning of everything, which transcends, it seems to transcend logic, but like more to the point, do the four of us conclude that there are no such things as uncaused events?
I'm agnostic on that.
I'm agnostic. I really think there's no uncaused events. I really just don't see how that would be possible. So
I think in our universe, our universe is probably entirely causal, but we don't really know that for a fact. It could be things popping in and out of existence without us knowing it. There could be at the small scale. So it's possible. I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility. But
in any case, it's not a provable or testable sort of thing. I don't think, is it?
And
I'd be willing to theorize that everything is causal, and we can even theorize your conception of God on everything that's causal. But still, even if we said that everything is causal, then we just have this eternal regress that goes back, infinitely, basically.
Exactly. So now when we're describing what created our universe, what caused our universe, we're ascribing eternality to it. It always existed, as far as we know. I mean,
well, it could be our universe that always existed, or it came about through other universes, or some other.
No, but a trick. I know whether we say that or not. Let's say there were a zillion other universes that like we go back in time eternally, right?
Sure.
I mean, we never stop going back. Okay,
so something goes back in time eternally. Like, even if we have like a expand collapse theory where our universe just keeps expanding and collapsing, and it did that eternally. Basically, there's an eternal regress of it expanding and collapsing. Then that's all it is. It's just an eternal regress of expanding and collapsing of the same universe, basically.
Right. So if we're agreeing about causality, we're also agreeing that that the everything that exists now was caused by the everything that existed before the Big Bang.
Yeah, if you include everything as everything, then yes. So not just
All
the things in the universe, but everything, including if you want to say a god, or if you want to say other universes. Then if you just include everything in everything, then yes, obviously everything is everything.
Hey
right?
George.
All right.
Hey George. Poffo's messaging me, and he says he knows where you're trying to go and can make a case for it himself. Like, I think he knows where you're trying to go. So
all right, go for it, Poffo. Oh, wait a minute. Before you go, Poffo, let's. So basically, the last point I want to make is, like, if we're concluding that what created the Big Bang and this physical universe is both eternal and everything, then it seems logical to conclude that this eternal everything can be equally defined as God.
Why?
Because the term God preceded, the science of everything and eternality related to the universe.
Yeah, but like I said, most people's conception of God is a being or a deity.
But forget about most people's. Again, we could care less. Most people believe in free will. We could care less about what most people believe.
Yeah, but you're being a word revisionist if you're saying it's not a being.
I'm not. I'm being a word in other words, like, for example, the understanding before recently was that there was a steady state universe, that nothing moved, right? Okay, everybody believed that. It was wrong. It's not revisionist to say that it was wrong. We have a more accurate understanding of the nature of the universe. And just like, so we can have different understandings of God. Some can be right, some can be wrong.
Yeah, well,
right,
here's
Poffo,
yeah, well,
No, Poffo, let Poffo go ahead. So you say you know where we're going, go with it.
I know where you're going, George, but you have to understand that the other co-hosts, they're not going to follow this logic because, and you gotta let me speak and not interrupt. Just let me get this all out, okay? You're starting with a premise, the premise of what you already believe, and you're trying to squeeze.
No, sorry, you're completely wrong. No, the premise.
I asked you not to interrupt. I asked you not to interrupt, please.
But you already made your point.
But even if I'm wrong, give me the respect to let me speak.
But you've already made the point, Poffo, and you're misunderstanding. This isn't like that. I'm starting with a premise that's my premise. I'm starting with the premise that we all agree in. But they don't agree, George.
They don't agree, and I'm offering you an alternative.
We already went through this. You're going back. The reason, Poffo, I introduced this with this idea of logic and the proper definitions of what we consider is to address what you're saying. No, we are now considering the definitions of God, the definition of the universe from a logical standpoint.
All right.
We all agree with this.
I'm raising my hand here. What I don't agree with, George, is this idea that eternalness and everythingness can equate to the word God. So this is where we're in disagreement. So this is why you need to show us why God.
My point is that they are not in agreement with you. Like you're making these logical points that are logical to you, but they're actually not in agreement.
I'm sorry.
Ask them. We'll go ahead and ask them. I mean, ask them.
We already basically, Poffo, what you're asking is like whether we agree that logic is the proper determinant of what we're considering. And
no. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the way that you unpacked it is actually flawed, and there is a more rational, logical way to go about it.
But, no, I'm sorry.
Okay. So I'm not allowed to. So I'm not allowed to talk. Is that? So
hey, Poffo's just trying to help, man.
It's not. You're wrong. I'm sorry. You're wrong. Okay.
It's got to be.
You have a
discourse back and forth. We're not we have to talk back and forth.
All right. So Trick, let me address your point. Basically, you asked how what's the rationale behind ascribing this term God to eternal everythingness.
Correct.
Okay.
So even let's say we agree, we 100% agree that there's an eternalness and there's an everythingness. Everything is, along the way it just eternally regresses back. Let's say we agree on that. why does that equate to the term that you're going to use?
I asked you guys this before. I mean, did we agree that God is properly defined as eternal?
That's not the only qualifier.
I don't think that we've agreed to that. At least I haven't specifically, because when we're talking about what's proper of a definition of God, who really sets that? And that's kind of what we're trying to get at: is how do we say what's the proper definition of God or anything?
George, you've had the floor
on.
since the beginning of the podcast until now, and I've asked you politely to let me speak for a little while and really help you make your own point. But at this stage in the game, if you're going to keep interrupting me, I'm just going to sign off.
Make a point. Poffo, just what I'm saying is, like, you tend to be extremely long-worded, and you tend to kind of like go from point to point to point. Make one point concisely, and then let us respond.
If you interrupt me, if anybody interrupts me in the next 5 minutes, I'm just going to sign off, okay? And no hard feelings.
Right, but I will interrupt you if you keep going on and on. I promise you that.
I asked for 5 minutes. You just took 20 minutes, and no one is following your logic. So I'm
No, you were wrong about that. People are following my logic. You may not agree with it or accept it, but
Chandler, are you following George's logic? Yes or no?
Not at all.
Come on.
No. Time out. You guys aren't being fair. George.
Okay, Trick, are you following George's logic?
Look, George is trying to.
Yes or no?
When you say following his logic, you mean, am I agreeing with his logical conclusion? No. But is he
Hold on, Poffo. Let Trick finish.
Is he discoursing back and forth, asking questions, allowing us to ask him questions? Yes, he is doing that. So what you need to do, Poffo, if you want to get in on this, is ask George a question that's pertinent to this, or be concise on what you want to ask. And then,
George, what is your motivation behind this trajectory?
Inconsequential, at this point.
So if he doesn't answer my questions, how am I supposed to?
Because it is inconsequential.
I just answered your question.
I think it's pretty important. I think motivations and intentions are important in this.
Well, yeah, I would agree with that, Poffo, because we have to understand the intention behind understanding why it's worth discussing in the first place.
All right, my primary intention, I have more than one intention. My primary intention, the only one that I want to relate to right now, is that there is, and I think you guys agree with, a proper way to define things like God and chairs and free will, and an improper way.
Okay.
Right. I agree with Georgia.
So allow me 5 minutes to define it the way I define it, or unpack it and make the same case you're trying to make. And what I'm offering is a more helpful way in terms of people who are all at these different places in their understanding of God. I don't want to talk about God for a minute, okay? I want to talk about reality, what we know, and that can be like verifiable and proven and demonstrably true, okay? What we know exists, the only thing that we know exists is nature. Nature, the universe, this existence, okay? I'm not going to talk about God. I want to talk about the natural world. I want to talk about nature. Nature is the oldest thing that we know of. Okay, forget about words like eternal or whatever. It precedes us by millions and billions of years. It is the oldest, most expansive thing there is. Okay, nature is the creative force behind our existence. It is our creator. Okay.
Well, then,
nature is. You're interrupting me. I said 5 minutes. That's all. Nature is everywhere at once. It is the only thing that can actually.
Poffo, no, I'm not going to grant you the 5 minutes. If you want to present this as a separate thesis on a podcast, you want to that could be a different topic. But you just said something that is wrong. In other words, like what, you're going to go on and say something else? Say something else? No, let's go.
I just wanted to get this out.
You just said no. Let's Poffo save it for another part. Let's save it for next week or the week after. Because you're presenting something that's somewhat
tangential. I'm presenting the same thing that you're presenting, and you're not letting me get to it. I'm trying to say I'm not starting from the premise that there is a God. I'm starting from the premise that there is nature, and nature actually constitutes what God is.
Well, please stop. Okay. Poffo, this discussion is about the term God, right? So we want to focus on the term God. So if you're going to talk about something that isn't focused on the term God, then it's going off topic.
But the end of my explanation, I'm going to show you how that the only thing that fits that definition is nature.
Okay,
that's the point.
Then we have to talk about each point that you're talking about. So if you're going to go off on all these things that are nature, I was trying to get it out
quick because I didn't want to keep arguing. But if you want to talk about each point, I can do that. I mean,
well, that's the way to go. So because we're having a discourse here. So if you say this aspect of nature equates to this aspect of God, we could talk about that. But
sure.
if you just rally off all these things about nature.
I was trying, Trick. That's how I normally talk. But George has dominated this episode, so I just wanted to get it out, and then I was going to step back and let you guys discuss it.
But see, Poffo, the problem is, like you just said, that nature is the creative force, right? But didn't we, the four of us, agree that God as the creator is like the standard, accurate definition?
The four of us didn't agree on the definition of God at all, and the four of us didn't agree on your logic at all. No.
Trick. Do you accept that God as the creator is an accurate definition of this concept of God?
Do I accept that God as the creator? So I think creation is an aspect of God that we need to invoke if we're going to use the word God, and I also think some consciousness, some thought.
So you're all right, but you're saying yes, right? In other words, like whether you believe in God or not, the proper way to define God is God as creator.
Yes. I think God has to be a creator. At least in most people's conceptions of God, I think. Yeah.
Excellent, Chandler.
Well, yeah, in most people's conceptions, yeah, they define God as a creator. Now, I think a question that we could ask is it proper for those people to define God as a creator? What if you have a God who's not a creator but does something else?
Chandler, we're not talking about polytheistic gods. We're talking about the monotheistic God.
But why? But why is
the monotheistic God can do anything it wants because it's all powerful, so it has no parameters. It can do whatever it wants. I mean, you can't box God into a system of logic that makes sense to you, because when you're talking about the concept of God, it's a completely abstract concept.
Poffo, you just defined God, gave God the attribute of omnipotence.
I never finished, but yeah, I was starting to. Go ahead.
Right, so if God is omnipotent, right?
That's all powerful. Sure.
Right, then God is the only thing that has the power to create, because God is omnipotent.
In my dissertation, I wasn't speaking of God. I was speaking of nature, and I said, yeah, nature is what created us. Yeah,
I realize, but do you understand how, to assert that God isn't the creator, but to assert that God is omnipotent is a contradiction?
No,
I wasn't speaking about God. I was speaking about nature. I'm trying to make the point that you can do exactly what you're trying to do, George, but go at it from a naturalistic perspective instead of starting off with a spiritual abstract concept or a premise that everyone has a separate definition on. Why don't you just observe reality and tell it like it is?
I am doing that. And that's what people did, several thousand years ago when they came up with the concept of God.
They personified those powers, those forces and powers, and they separated them, and they projected their own human qualities and characteristics, which was false.
You're going beyond this primary, fundamental concept of God as creator.
This is what the idea of a deity has always been. It's always been a projection, a human construct.
Okay. Can I just stop you guys for a second? Okay, so we're talking about God as the creator, and let's just say we all agree that God is a creator. Why do you think that there is a creation process in the universe and not just a causal process?
I think they're the same thing.
I just want to say that
you think a rock rolling down the hill creates rolling?
No, we're not talking about a rock rolling down the hill. We're talking about, the creation of everything being synonymous with the cause of everything.
Now, when you say creation, you're talking about. See, most people, when you talk about creation, you're talking about some kind of intention, some kind of creative intention. Whereas, let's imagine the universe that's just expanding and then retracting, and expanding and retracting eternally, just for the sake of argument.
Well, okay, and let's get.
You're saying the physics are just creating that expansion event, but it's just the expansion and retraction that's just causally being produced. So it's not really a creation event.
Well, we're talking trick. I mean, you can theorize about multiple universes expanding and contracting, but
it's not a multiple universe theory. It's one universe just expanding and contracting.
No, all right, I understand. But you're theorizing about that. The only thing we know is this current universe. So in other words, so we know that it came into being, and so we use the word creation. Like we can create a work of art, we can create a song. So something created the universe.
No, okay, but when we're talking about like the Earth, the Earth formation, we're just talking about a process of just matter consolidating into this form of the Earth. We're not talking about a creation, like we're not talking about someone taking a putty and making a sculpture out of it, right? So we're talking about.
Well, no, we are. I mean, there's different connotations of the word create, but one is like that something doesn't exist, and it becomes created, whether it's a sculpture or a building. It's to create, to make something from to make something come to existence.
Right. So when we're talking about a meteorite hitting the moon, it creates a crater on the moon, right? So if that's all you mean by create, then it's no different. It's
well, in a sense, you're right, but then we have, because of this causality, what caused the meteor to create the crater? So you have this causal regression going back to whatever preceded the Big Bang.
Right, and then you have a causal progression going back and back farther from there as well.
Right. So then we apply logic and say like that. I mean, in a certain sense, I think maybe I understand your logic in that that if reality is eternal, if what created, quote unquote, the universe is eternal, then it may not be accurate to use the word create, because what's eternal, by definition, was never created.
Right. What I was going to say was that creation is actually a perpetual process. There was no one-time creation event. Like the laws of our physical universe came into effect 13.8 billion years ago, but creation is an ongoing cyclical process. I don't believe there's any beginning or any end, and that eliminates the infinite regress problem.
All right, so we could say that there's no fundamental creation. If everything is eternal, there was no fundamental creation.
What we're actually seeing are manifestations of the nature, the quality of nature itself. What we're seeing is the unfolding and the emergent properties of this universe.
All right. Let's
again, to your logic.
If we're gonna because you guys, if we're gonna either defend or refute God, we have to come up with a proper definition. Again, this is what we're trying to ascertain. So, if we're going to logically, for example, refute God, we would need a definition of God. If we're going to defend God, we'd need it. So, what is our agreed upon definition of God?
My only criteria for a God is basically a being that created the universe.
Okay.
That's it. I don't care about any other properties that you give them, like omniscience, omnipotence, or anything like that.
That's good, Trick. That's good. That simplifies. Poffo, Chandler, do you accept and agree with Trick's criteria?
I don't have a criteria because I'm just reacting and responding to what my senses observe.
I'm not offered a criteria. Trick just said God. The accurate definition of God.
Isn't that backwards though? Why should we try and fit what exists into our model? Why don't we just explore and embrace and observe what already exists?
In order to either defend or refute God, we have to have a definition of God and a criteria for that definition that we all agree upon.
Well,
I don't want to. I don't believe God exists. Then at this point, I don't believe God exists.
I realize that.
Forget about it. But I'm speaking my mind.
God exists either.
I'm saying I don't believe God exists. I don't believe any of this is.
I realize. Chandler, I hear that.
Yeah.
Chandler.
Well,
the universe, not the world that we live in.
Yeah. Well, okay. So here's the thing: is that I like Poffo. I don't really have a criteria for what a God must be. Rather, in my journey as why I started just calling myself an atheist and saying I no longer believe in God was because I rejected the criteria of the Christian God that I was taught. And so it's their criteria, but I don't have a pet criteria or a pet God that I need to defend. So I don't even care.
So Chandler, are you saying that you reject the Judeo-Christian God, but you don't categorically reject, the existence of a monotheistic God?
Well, I guess maybe I don't completely reject it. It's just that I just am very much, I don't know. Yeah, I guess because it all is a problem of definition. You can
right. And Chandler, even with that, even if like so you're ambivalent, you still have to have a criteria for how you're defining God to even defend or reject this non-Judeo-Christian conception of God.
But that's easy. I mean, you could just easily refute the Bible and the claims that they make.
No. Papa, that what I said is like to refute a God that's not Judeo-Christian. In other words, like if you have a conception of God that's totally apart from that.
Okay.
When you say refute, I agree with George. You need. I mean, obviously, when you're talking about whether God exists or not, you need some definition. You need.
Most of people's general concepts come from the Judeo-Christian notion of God.
Hold on. No, forget about Judeo. That's just again. Go ahead, Trick. Go ahead.
So we need to know what we're talking about, and I think that you need some kind of qualities to prescribe. You need to have some definition. Otherwise, it's just a word that's meaningless, basically.
All right. So Trick, I agree with your criteria of a being that God, can be defined. An accurate definition of God is a being that created. What's the word you used after creation, or
just created everything that isn't God? We'll say. How about
everything that is? Okay, absolutely.
Everything that is except for God. God is. We'll say there's this eternal God that created everything that isn't God.
Excellent.
And when we say God, we mean a being or a deity, meaning a conscious thinking entity.
Right, and so and I think, but you're also, I think, ascribing eternality to that God. That God is an eternal being that created everything.
We could do that just for the sake. That doesn't matter to me.
Right. Okay.
Even if the God just spontaneously arose and then created the universe after that, I could care less.
So let's move from that. So let's advance that. Now, of course, you guys realize that now we're stepping backward to needing to define. So what's our definition of being if we're defining God as a being?
As like an entity or a deity, something that has conscious thought. Conscious.
Are you saying that like for a being to be a being, it has to have consciousness?
It has to have consciousness and intelligence, correct.
All right. All right. So now, and we've had this conversation before. Let's see if progresses from last times. So now we're at the stage where we have to reach an agreement on what consciousness is.
Right. Well, I think we experience consciousness, right?
Yes, but I think in the past we've had differing, ideas of what consciousness actually is.
Okay, so what do you think consciousness is?
I tend to be a generalist in this word, there are about 20 different definitions of consciousness offered, I think, by psychologists, whatever. So like I go with the most standard and general to say that consciousness is awareness.
Okay, awareness, sure. Well, we could use the word awareness. It's kind of I think awareness is something that consciousness requires, basically. So you have awareness. You have a number of features. So
sweet shell guys. I've been listening for 25 minutes. Sorry, Trey. I've been listening for 25 minutes now, and
go ahead, Jerry.
A shell game here.
All right, Jerry. I mean, you got to be a bit more specific.
Okay, so basically, we're playing a shell game here. So far as I'm concerned, consciousness is an illusion. It's definitely not what it seems. I sort of agree with George. He can define God however he wants. Trick can define God however he wants. Chandler, should he want to define God as a monotheistic Christian God, that's fine too.
Okay,
all right, well, Jerry, you're not. I don't think you're completely
believe in any God. That's fine.
Yuri, what's an illusion, Yuri?
Illusion. It's not what it seems.
What do you mean? What it seems?
Like we think we have awareness. How
can you have an illusion without consciousness?
Seems. It means. Okay. All I can suggest is, after this is finished with, so Google "Am I Conscious Now" by Susan Blackmore. She's a sort of retired professor of psychology, and she's written an entry level university book on consciousness. Anyway,
you gotta
so just you get a chance, but basically we go through. Basically, if you actually watch your own consciousness, it's very hard to do it. That's the first thing. You'll find you go through the day.
Yuri, let me stop you for a minute.
And you're not really conscious any time. It's almost like.
Listen to me. You're saying that consciousness. I think you're asserting that consciousness doesn't exist. Is that correct?
No, I'm saying it's not what it seems.
All right. So forget about how it seems. What it seems. What is your definition of consciousness is?
We think of consciousness as this magic source. And for those of us who don't believe in free will, we should be really skeptical of consciousness.
All right, but you're
at least examine it really closely on a personal level.
Yeah, so I don't think consciousness is anything magical. I think it's a property of brain states. So that's what I think consciousness that we know of. The consciousness that we know of arises from brain states.
All right, we got to go. Then we got to go with my definition. Then, is the fundamental attribute of consciousness awareness?
I think that is a fundamental attribute of consciousness.
All right, so aside from awareness, what's another attribute of consciousness?
Qualia, experience, things like that.
Whoa. Qualia in the terms of just like a thought form? I mean,
qualia's like for example, when you experience a rose, you experience the qualia of redness. Or if you have these sensory experiences, you could experience that there's a redness to it, or the smell of the rose, or
right. Right. All right. So I think you're saying that
that
we could
particular example is a definite illusion.
So I think you're saying, Trick, that you can that consciousness, can be aware of color and certain criteria that describe what it's aware of, but I think you'd have to concede that this qualia and these other attributes are simply forms of awareness.
Well, you're aware of you're aware of the states, basically, of the
exactly. So whether we want to refer to what we're aware of as qualia or whatever else, the fundamental attribute of consciousness seems to be awareness. I can't think of any other attribute that consciousness has fundamentally than awareness.
Well, how are you defining awareness? You think you need experience, right, for awareness, right?
Right, and actually, all right, that's a good question. So, let's relate this this definition of awareness to the totality of existence. For example, reality, whether we want to call it the world or the universe. And I think the other, not only to the totality of existence, but like let's go with the universe. If the universe is what exists, and it is governed or controlled by the laws of nature, the various laws of nature, would we agree that in order to control something, or actually itself, the universe would have to be aware of itself?
No, this is where we wouldn't agree. So we would just say that there's a mechanistic process that's unaware of itself.
Hey guys, this is going a little fast for me. I'm still not entirely sure how we moved from the whole God thing to the consciousness thing. How did that happen?
Because Trick presented the criteria.
Because it's a property of God, apparently.
Exactly. So Trick is defining God as a being. So now, in order to determine whether God is a being or not, we have to define being. And then Trick said, well, a being is something that is conscious. And then we asked, well, what is consciousness? And so then we came to awareness.
Huh. Oh man. Yeah. And once we get into the consciousness thing, it's strange how that tends to go on forever, because it seems for some reason people can't agree on the consciousness part, and I don't know, man.
No, I know, and this is I think a much more difficult problem than we started with.
Yeah.
Right. So when we talk about rocks, we understand that rocks probably aren't conscious. There's no reason to believe that a rock is conscious, whereas there is reason to believe that humans are, right?
Well, I can argue against that, Trick. In other words, like, if rocks are composed of the basic elements and forces that are found in the universe, and if rocks are part of this, then I think that these forces, these quote unquote, these controlling forces that control everything outside of the rock are also controlling what's inside of the rock. And I think what I'm trying to say is, like, to control everything, you have to be everything. So the rock has to be part of this controlling mechanism.
You don't have to be everything. So rock doesn't have to be wet, whereas water can be wet. So you can assign properties to specific aspects of the universe that aren't in other aspects of the universe. So,
Trick, I agree with you in terms of wetness, but we're actually considering now not wetness but control. Let's go.
Control is different than consciousness. So you can have a clock that isn't conscious, yet each gear in that clock is controlling other gears and stuff like that, and you have a specific time that goes along as this all happens without any consciousness and without any intelligence.
All right, but wait a minute. Like in other words, like, you have these. We all agree that there are the laws of nature that control everything. Is there anyone of us that disagrees with that?
Yeah,
right.
The laws of nature control everything in the universe.
I disagree with the phrasing, semantics.
What's your point?
What happens is laws of nature describe, any man-made laws describe what happens. Just be very careful, and and those laws describe to varying degrees of accuracy.
Right, but all right, but are we saying, Yuri? Could we agree then, like, that the laws of nature are our most accurate understanding of what controls things? That we may not get it completely right, but they kind of like connote the idea that something is controlling everything.
The laws of nature combined with matter and energy.
And what the laws of nature do.
Go ahead, Yuri.
Yeah, they describe the causality that we see.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, but I mean, like,
the laws of nature or physics or whatever describe causality.
Right, but you have to understand that causality itself is a form of control. Causality controls, something is controlling causality. In other words, the causality can't but, Well,
yeah, what do you mean by something is causing? Like some each thing causes the next thing. That's it. That's the amount of control.
Right, but this causality, it's a law of nature, right? So it's one of many laws of nature. Causality is one law. Then you have like the what?
What's that, Yuri?
I disagree with the phrasing.
Well, I'm waiting for your response.
I disagree with the phrasing in that it basically, we have causality. We're relatively sure of it. We're not 100% sure. And the laws of nature describe how that causality works. And
all right, but
it's that simple, and I wouldn't go any further than that.
all right, but are you saying, though, that the causality controls everything? Are you guys saying that nothing is in control of anything?
The word control is problematic. Like are you talking about...
The control is...
Yuri, I don't know if you're talking, but we're not hearing. Guys, are we losing?
You broke up, Troy.
Yeah, I think we're having some audio problems on Yuri's end.
Yeah, Yuri, we didn't hear a word you said.
I'm okay.
We didn't hear you. If you were saying control is...
Me or Trick?
No, we didn't hear you after that. We didn't hear,
But it was actually Trick was talking.
No, the problem's coming from your end. So what you were saying, do you agree or disagree that there's such a thing as control?
I disagree. It's a problematic word.
All right, does anybody else?
It basically implies direction.
Well, I would have to say, the word control is really hard, because I feel like we could get into a debate about what it means to control something, just like this consciousness or this God thing. Like, what's the correct definition of control? And so what we're seeing here is a problem that never ends, and it's like
don't assume that it never ends. Because we can't reach this.
Hey, George, I'm fine with the word control as long as we don't invoke any consciousness into it. So, for example, we can say that gravity and the slope of a hill controls the way the rock rolls down the hill, but it's not so purposeful, intentional control. It's just control.
All right, so you're right. So let's go with that. Let's go from that. And so, let me make the assertion that in order for the universe or reality to control itself, it has to be aware of itself.
No, it doesn't. That's what I'm saying about the rock.
Oh, I know. Well, all right, but when you refer to the what in the hill, the rock?
Yeah, so we could say there's a rock that is rolling down the hill, and it's rolling around the hill in a specific causal way due to the gravity, due to the slope of the hill, due to the configuration of the rock, due to basically the physics of that configuration. It rolls down the hill a specific way due to that. So we could say those things control how that rock will roll down the hill.
Physics.
Yeah. But it has nothing to do with something being aware of the control. It has nothing to do with something being aware of where the rock will end up down at the bottom of the hill. It has nothing to do with any awareness at all. It just has to do with
all right. Now let's
causal factors.
Let's continue to explore that. Now, in order to determine whether the universe is aware of its control of itself, I think now we have to define what awareness is.
Okay, let's do that. So how do you define awareness?
It's consciousness.
I think awareness is for example...
Being conscious.
No, hold on. I read once where a single-celled organism, right, in a dish will move toward the light or toward the darkness or toward the heat or toward the cold. Could we agree that that organism, that single cell, has to be aware of
No.
heat and cold or light and dark?
No, we don't have to agree with that.
Okay.
I think so. That's similar to saying a chemical reaction is aware of the chemical reaction that processes. So when you combine two chemicals together, and it foams up and makes a big mess, somehow because the two chemicals are reacting and doing something, that it's being aware of that. And there's no reason to invoke awareness to that.
Okay, so then we're still trying to define what awareness is.
Right. So obviously, when we were talking about consciousness, we're talking about awareness. So when we're talking about intelligence and consciousness and things like that, we're talking about brains, basically. We're talking about brains that think about things and do things and are aware of things. They understand what is going on. There's some understanding. There's some conscious understanding. That's what awareness is. It's like a conscious understanding of something. So the rock rolling down the hill, there's nothing in the hill, the rock, gravity, nothing is aware that the rock is rolling down the hill. It's just rolling down the hill.
Okay, so like, can we, let's say if I were to assert that the rock is aware, would your response be that, like, well, we have no evidence of a mechanism by which it's aware, so we can't conclude that it is aware?
Correct. We would say we have no evidence for awareness in the rock, so we shouldn't believe in it.
Okay. So let's apply this to, for example, the Big Bang. If we have no evidence of the mechanism by which it existed or created the universe, are we then left needing to conclude that we have no evidence of anything before the Big Bang, and so that nothing existed before the Big Bang?
We shouldn't believe in a specific thing that existed before the Big Bang, because we don't know what existed before the Big Bang.
All right, but can we axiomatically or at least logically conclude that something must have existed regardless of what its exact nature is?
Even if we conclude that something must have existed, we shouldn't believe in a specific thing that existed. Just that something existed.
Right, but
regardless
I mean, like,
of what it is.
But if we're addressing everything, wouldn't the criteria of specific be inconsequential? I mean, like, or I think you're saying that the specific nature of the everything or
right.
of the right. Okay, all right. So you're defining being as something that must be conscious. All right. I mean, like, I didn't want to go down this road and all, but we gotta do this, because like, yeah, we're not gonna like get to the definition of God as I mean, like, yeah, as I intended, but this is interesting, and we're making progress in this. All right, we need to talk about intentionality, because, like, in other words, like, what I think, Trick, what you're saying is a fundamental characteristic of consciousness, that you attribute only to, like, say, a human being, or just, beings that have, like, this apparatus, of this biological apparatus, is that we're able to intend, that intention is a fundamental attribute of consciousness. Is that correct?
Well, it's not necessarily fundamental, but it's something that we do, and for the God that we're talking about, I think the intention of the creation of the universe, for example, is kind of a key aspect. I mean, I think most people's conception of God thinks that there's an intentional creature, or not, creature is a bad word, just say deity or being, an intentional being that created the universe for a reason.
Right, but I mean, are you tying intention to a certain body? In other words, like, if you're tying intention to a certain specific kind of biology that organisms of a certain, level of advancements have, then, can
Well,
you...
we know that the central nervous system and brains seem to be where our intentions arise from. Whether there's some other configuration in the universe that has consciousness and intentions and things like that, we don't know. We have no information on that, but we know of ours and our specific configurations. So we can believe in those, but we shouldn't believe in anything until we have evidence otherwise in regards to the rest.
Okay. For example, like DNA. Does DNA have intent?
No.
Okay, so like when DNA replicates, when DNA replicates,
does chemistry have intent? No.
Why? I mean, like, why wouldn't the intent of DNA be to replicate?
Because replication is just part of it's just a causal process. It's no different than the rock rolling down the hill.
Well, I would have to say one thing though. Our intentions.
Here I disagree with.
Yeah. Well, okay. What I would have to say is though, all of the things that we do describe as intention are also a causal process as well. So so everything's causal. But I think, like, it's when
Yes.
we're getting down to what's intentional or not, I think we have to remain agnostic on some of that. Like, how could we really know about the intention of DNA? Like, you know what I mean?
Well,
Trick,
let's just say there's no evidence for
But wait a minute,
intention in DNA, but there is
Chandler,
evidence in brain states.
I hear where
having
you're
intent.
going, but wait a minute. If we like start with a premise that we don't have a free will, that that basically this consciousness that we experience is just as causal as everything else. So from that we have to conclude that whatever happened before the Big Bang in a causal manner causes our consciousness.
Yeah, and so consciousness is a causal process that happens through causality. And so, like, I get where George is going, I think, although I'm completely baffled as to a lot of this conversation. But what I think is going on here is that just as consciousness happens in humans and most animals that we can see, it could be happening in other levels that we're not aware of. Sure, there wouldn't be any evidence of, but it's something that could be true nonetheless.
There's a lot of.
Can I?
What's that?
Go ahead,
Chandler, could I put the opposite point of view? So basically, we don't believe chemical reactions have intention or consciousness, things like that, or at least some don't. And maybe, perhaps, we should be a little bit more skeptical about our own intentions and consciousness. And this is probably where I really disagree with Trick, in that basically, he's arguing you get to a certain level of complexity or whatever, you get a brain, and all of a sudden you have intent and consciousness. And I think this is where we should be a little bit more careful.
All right.
Well, I mean, but you already said that we have consciousness, right? You agree we have consciousness. You're just not agreeing that we have the possibly correct interpretation of what consciousness is.
Right. I think what Yuri's saying is that consciousness doesn't necessarily include intent. Go ahead, Yuri.
It doesn't include intent, but then again, it's sort of a mixture. It's George's everything is conscious. It's Susan Blackmore's, she's not conscious, and by extension, nothing else is. And they're two sides of the same coin.
Can you explain that further? I don't see if somebody's saying everything is conscious and somebody's saying nothing is conscious. How do you connect those?
So Susan Blackmore. So to my mind is So basically, what we're describing is some kind of feedback loop where, just imagine you've got an autopilot that can fly from O'Hare to Heathrow. So can you do that without some sort of consciousness or awareness? You can literally program that plane to fly from Chicago or wherever to Heathrow.
Right. That's just not the way. That's just not the way we work, though. So
is that plane
not that we're aware of. We don't have any evidence of it being conscious, but we're aware of humans being conscious and having.
Yeah, but hold on. But
hey guys,
is that autopilot?
I'm sorry.
No, Chandler, what's up?
Yeah,
be aware of something.
Hey,
Hold on, guys.
Hey, yeah. Well, I was gonna go take my shower because it's 7:30, so I'm gonna get off of here. But I'm just gonna leave the computer on so that you guys can finish it up in the next half hour. Because really, it's George, it's you and Trick mostly, and a little bit of Yuri having this debate about consciousness. So I'm lost anyway.
That's all right. All right.
So you can just continue.
That's right. Join us.
All right.
All right. Sounds good, Chandler.
Okay. Bye.
All right. So wait a minute. Yuri, Trick, I wanted to go back to intent. Do the two of you accept this concept of errors arise of mutations, genetic mutations arising from error?
You can call them errors. I mean, I don't know if errors is the right word, but you can call it that. It's kind of like.
That's the wrong word.
Yeah, error's the wrong word. What's the word? It's just a mutation, but it's just a change in gene sequencing, basically.
Right. So in other words, like the gene, the DNA, like, 'cause I've seen this in a lot of textbooks. They say it's a mutations are due to errors in the replication process. So I think what we're saying.
I mean, you could think of it that way because it's kind of like
don't call it errors.
It's kind of like a photocopy. If you take a photocopy and then you have another copy, the two copies might not be identical, right? So
right.
But
again, like,
but there's a causal reasons for that, right? So there's maybe a scratch on the glass. There's whatever. There's causal reasons for it. Same thing with us. Like we have mutations due to environment and certain conditions cause mutations. There's a number of causal factors that cause mutations.
Right, but again, like the central point is like, if we agree that error is not the right word, I think
error assumes that there's a mistake being made, and that
assume
well, that assumes that when there isn't a mistake being made, that is correct. So it's not what's that?
The replication is slightly chaotic.
Let's go mechanism. Let's go to mechanism. If we can,
the replication is slightly chaotic.
All right. Well, chaotic, but chaotic it just complicates things. That relates to prediction and all. So it's all causal, So, but let's go back. Let's go back to this.
No, it's saying what it is.
No, but chaos refers to kind of like
our universe is chaotic, like it or not.
No, I know, but it's causal. So chaos just refers to prediction.
It's partly that.
Right. So like, going back, Trick, I think the same way you do with mechanism, you ascribe consciousness to human beings and perhaps other organisms because we're aware of a mechanism that explains it. Okay. Now, why can't we use that? In other words, like before the Big Bang, we don't know what there was, right? But
right.
We have no mechanism to explain the laws of nature, to explain the existence of mass and energy and the forces. We have absolutely no mechanism but we still have that because like none of these things exist.
So at that point, what we say is these are the things that exist, and we don't know why they exist. We're not really sure what caused them or why we have these laws of
no. I know. My point is like, for example, like we know that all this exists simply because